My name is Freeman. I'm one of the OIDCs at Mountain View, and I'm joined here with Kristen, who's also an OIDC. In case you don't know what OIDCs are, they are part of the ed tech team at each school. And they are teachers, or they're people who are also in the classroom, so they're teaching at the same time to give them an opportunity to experiment with things. Um, but primarily, we focus on Canvas, so just wanted to make you guys aware of us. And I also wanted to run through the cohort course just to show you guys about this resource available. Um, uh, it basically, if you're in a junior high, it follows the feeding pattern into the high school, so you'll see something different. But all high schools have this cohort course, and this is really where a lot of our trainings are coming out of. What I mean by that is, so like today, I'm going to be covering uh, question banks right here. However, I'm sure that some of you we have this organized in a certain way where it may not be easy to find stuff. So I did want to point out before I move on that we have this index here. So if you're ever looking for something specific, you can go to the core course, and this is an easier way perhaps to find answers to specific questions. All right, so today we're talking about question banks, um, and I'm going to be using one of my classes for this.
Hey Freeman, there's like a notification blocking our view in the corner, just an FYI.
Which corner? Oh, this one?
Yes.
Okay. I also need to figure out how to, okay. All right. So I'll start in one of my courses. The first question is, how do you get to the question banks? You need to go to quizzes. And you should be seeing all the quizzes that you have made. And then up here in the corner next to the add quiz, you'll see the more options button. If you click on that, it'll drop down and it says manage question banks, which you can click on to access your question banks. So these are the question banks that I have available for this course. I'm an English teacher, so it's mostly just vocabulary and fallacies. But um, so question banks are just areas where you can compile questions in order to access later for to pull from randomly, um, which differentiates things. It also it helps out with keeping kids from essentially because they're usually seeing different questions since they're all being pulled randomly. But they're just areas where you can put questions just so when you're making quizzes, you can just say, I want my quiz to access this bank, and it will pull from them randomly. Um, so these are all the banks that I have made thus far, but I'll add a new one. So we'll say sample bank. You go over here and you push add question bank, and you press enter, and that bank is now made. And so in order to get into it, I can click on the bank, and then in this bank, I can add questions. So I'll add one. Sample question, whatever. And I can just get rid of extra answers if I want. Update question, and then now I have this question in this question bank. Um, so instead of actually going in and creating your quizzes, um, you can instead just be making a bunch of banks as you're thinking about what you want to assess your students in. Be making a whole bunch of banks, and then when you go to create your quizzes, you can just have them pull from the banks instead of um, creating original questions each time. So I'm going to go back to the question banks. I did want to show you that after you have them made, so once you have all these question banks made, you can just move questions around amongst the question banks themselves. So actually, I'll show you this while I'm at it. Did I not save my question bank? Is that what happened? Oh, no, there it is. Okay. So if I am looking for, if I want to prioritize a certain bank, I can always bookmark it, which which I thought made it move towards the top of the list, but oh no, I can just view bookmarked over here. Okay. Um, so if there are questions
I
that you
think
know that
they're in alphabetical order. That's how they're organized.
if I
So,
wanted to see the prioritized ones, I can just
yeah. Or what I do is I number mine in the order of my units. That helps me find them. You can also use Control F on that screen to jump to whichever question bank you're looking for. So if you know what the name of it is, I'll do that. Usually I'll do Control F and jump to it. Not a big deal when you're first starting off, but when your list gets really long, it's nice to be able to do that.
so as I was saying, if you know you have questions in other banks that you would like to get into this new bank that you've created, what you can actually do is go into the bank that you have the question in, and you can move or copy questions around um, in order to, of course, not be having to recreate them. So, for example, if I wanted this in that sample bank that I just created, I would say move or copy question. I always keep this checked, keep a copy in this bank just because I'm always afraid for whatever reason. I have a paranoia of losing things. But if I wanted to move this to that sample bank, then I would just click the sample bank and make sure the copy stays and move or copy. Um, now, this question will be in that sample bank that I just made. I can also, you have the option over here of moving multiple questions at a time. So if I need a lot of these questions to end up in the sample bank, then I can just go check them, make sure it's headed to the right spot, and then move these questions. And then you'll see that when you get back to your question banks, all the moving you did should be there. See, now I have 5 questions in here. So all of these questions are there. Are there any questions so far about question banks? No? All right. I also wanted to show you when you're in your question banks, you have what are called unfiled questions, which are awesome. Uh, so what Canvas does is as you're creating quizzes, it actually banks all of your questions for you. So that means that every single question that you've made should be found inside this unfiled questions, which is great. So if you decided like, oh, I made this quiz, I should have actually just made the banks anyway, because that'll give me more flexibility as far as using the questions that are available. You can actually go in here and find a little bit of searching, and there could be, you could search them the way Kristen was talking about earlier with Control F, or you could, if there's another way, if anybody else has a different way of organizing these, um, share that.
One thing that you can do as well is you can rename that bank. And then, so like if you've just started building stuff and let's say your quiz is like the quiz you made is all that's in there, you could rename that unfiled question bank to be like Unit 1 if that's what you've started with and that's what all the questions are. And then new unfiled questions will reform in their own question bank. So it actually makes it its own thing. That's one little trick I've learned.
Yeah. Oh. So yeah, just be aware that if you've created a quiz, and you're like, oh, because this happened to me a lot, especially when I started using Canvas, where I would make a quiz and then I would go, I should have just made banks out of that, and then eventually I figured out there is this unfiled question area, which is awesome. So once you've made your banks, then the next question is how do you use them in the quizzes? And so I'll move on. Um, so I'll go back to my quizzes, and I will add a quiz. Ask me about if you're seeing this, you should always be clicking classic we're advising at this point.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway, remember that. What I would push, but I just wanted to make sure. So, I'm creating my quiz, right? I have my directions. I don't know why I need to type this, but and then I've chosen all the other options. Then I'll go over to questions. And there's a couple things that you can do with the banks here. So the one you'll probably do most often is you'll create a new question group to link your quiz to that bank. So Um, I've created a new question group, and I want to link it to that sample that I just made. I don't remember how many were in there, but it wasn't more than three. And I'll say pick three. You can assign the different amounts, of course, for the questions that you want them to be worth. And then you click link to a question bank, and your question banks will pop up. And I will find that sample one that I made. Sample bank. Click select bank. And now it's telling me that all these questions will be pulled from this sample bank. And then to finish this, I just need to click create group. And what's going to happen is when students interact with this quiz, they're going to go in and they're going to be seeing random questions being pulled from this bank. So one thing that I think everyone needs to keep in mind is that when you're creating questions in a bank, you need to make sure that they're equitable. What I mean by that is if you have 10 questions in a bank and you know that your students are going to be only seeing 5 of those at random, then you need to make sure that they're relatively equivalent as far as whatever you're assessing your students on so that it's fair at that point. That can be one of the problems that arises with these banks is the randomizing of questions. Then some students will get a vastly different test, and you don't want that test to be a lot easier or a lot more difficult for that student.
Um, One thing that I do on my banks is I actually name them based on how many I usually want to pick from them. If my questions aren't all equitable and I'm actually going to have all of them chosen, then I'll just say, like his bank had 5 questions. I'll say pick 5 or pick 3 or whatever it is that um, I put that in the name so I remember how many I usually take. One of the benefits to choosing to still making a question bank, even if you're going to be pulling from all of the questions, is it does scramble the questions for the kids. So they're all going in a different order. If they retake it, they'll get the questions in a different order. And and then obviously if you're making a bank where they're only getting like 3 out of the 10 questions that you made or whatever, wanting to make them equitable, but the nice thing is they get a new set each time they take the test. So it does make retakes a little bit more what's the word? I don't know, like valid, and they're not just like memorizing answers, but actually having to figure it out. So
Thank you. Yeah. So once you've inserted or once you have your um, question group in there that's pulling from your bank, you would of course push save, make sure you're always saving. Um, and I'll actually show you something else you can do with the banks. So if you don't necessarily want to put a whole group in, you can actually just go search the banks for specific questions through find a question. So you'll click find question and you'll notice all your banks are over here. You can go in and find the question that you want to put individually into the quiz, which is useful as well. Um, I'll just add one. So are there any questions so far about what I've gone over? Okay. Um, One of the last things I want to talk about, since this will be happening, of course, a lot during this specific situation we're in, is the sharing of banks. So what I mean is when you're sharing these with your colleagues, you need to be specifically careful with sharing the banks and the quizzes at the same time. So what I mean is if you're sharing a quiz with somebody, you need to also be making sure that you share the bank. And actually, even when you're importing things into your own course from other courses that you might have made these in, if you're importing them from the sandbox, you need to be very careful that when you pull the quiz over, you pull the bank over at the same time. I actually, I always pull my banks over first, um, and that may just be in my head that that needs to happen. But It just seems like I've had less trouble over the years when I make sure the banks are in my course before I pull the quiz, but that just might be me. But you need to make sure that you're doing them at the same time because if you don't, you'll just be missing all sorts of questions on your quiz. And I think if you pull the bank over later, it causes problems. And I think that was the fear I was alluding to a second ago. And if any of the other OIDCs have any other advice about this, that would be helpful. Um, does anyone? No? Okay. Um, so, so do you guys, should I go through sharing quizzes right now or anybody want to sharing content or is that outside what we're up to?
I think it'd be cool to see.
Okay. So, let's see if, like if I want to pull, uh, import some content from a different course into this course in order to use it. Um, I'll go over to settings, find import course content. And then let's just say I want to pull it from a previous. So I'll click on Canvas or copy a Canvas course. You guys will see something different as far as this goes. I have a million classes. That would help. Let's just say it's previous English class. Select specific content. I always click adjust events and due dates when I'm doing this, just for good measure. And I remove whatever dates exist, and I can always go back in and change that later. So I don't want it to cause any sort of problems if I, for whatever reason, forget. Anyway, click import. That'll open up selecting content. I'll click on this. So when I'm pulling the quizzes from this course, like I was saying, I need to be very careful that I'm aware of what quizzes do go with which banks. And so I'll click the quiz that I want to move, and then I will open the question banks, make sure that I have, typically these are pulling reviewed. So I would click whatever bank I need, and then I would select content and move that. Like I said before, because of a perhaps irrational paranoia, I would actually go in and move the bank and then go back in and move the quiz, which probably isn't necessary. But and that's how you would move things from a different course. Now, as far as sharing with colleagues, so actually, other OIDCs, do you guys know the direct share? Does that work with banks and quizzes the same way? Does it work with banks? Anybody know?
I think it should works with quizzes. I haven't tried it with banks. I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. So are there any questions about banks? Or actually, at this point, I'll go ahead and open this up to any question. I will say this, if you're having trouble, like I said, there have been, you can run into hiccups when you're moving content around that is accessing banks. So when you're moving quizzes around, and if you ever have any issues, just get a hold of your OIDC, and we can probably go in and figure out what the problem is and be of help that way. I've had to do that a lot. So teachers move things and they're not quite working, and it's typically easy for us to go in and figure out what's happening with those links. So if you have any problems, just immediately reach out to your OIDCs and we can help. Are there any questions at all at this point?
I noticed when you were importing that, you went bank 1 through 3, but you only selected lesson 3.
Oh, when I was giving the example?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's because, so,
Was that lessons 1 through 3, or you were just, that was lesson 3 coordinating back to that?
well, on these quizzes, actually, I was looking for review. So what I would have done is, these are the review banks that I have from 1 through 3.
Okay.
It's actually not important. It's just how I was just choosing.
Okay, how you organized it.
What's that?
It's how you organize it.
Yeah. So like I have review questions, and so if they're taking quiz, actually it'd be more like quiz 4. They would get review questions from 1 through 3, but
Okay.
should know 3 as well at that point.
Yeah. So you wouldn't select 3 lessons in one bank.
Um, 3 different quizzes in one bank.
Yeah.
You could, and actually
Okay.
that would be fine. So if I were to move, like if I knew that like quizzes 5, 6, and 7 all needed to pull from the review bank of 1 through 3, then I can click all of those together and move them.
Okay. But you mentioned earlier that you would move the bank first, but you're doing it simultaneously right here.
I am, yeah. So and I don't know if anybody other OIDC wants to jump in on this. That's just something I do. Um, I'm not really sure if it's necessary at this point. But yeah, I
I
would
move
go
them
in.
at the same time.
Yeah, well, I'm sure most teachers move in the same time, and that's not a problem. I should have actually probably just not mentioned that. But
Yeah.
I would move the bank and then go back in and find the quiz and move them next.
Do you have to be careful with the amount of questions because we've had questions where we had over 100, and for some reason the bank didn't come over with it, and we had issues with the large quizzes.
I don't know. None of the when they moved the bank over, none of the questions showed up.
Yeah.
Oh,
And it could have been, could have been me. We didn't do it right the first time.
yeah. I don't think there's a limit on questions. I don't.
Okay.
Pretty sure. As far as bank sizes go.
Yeah, there was one issue that I had a couple of years ago. Britton and I were working on it where we couldn't, find the questions. The questions were there, but they weren't pulling.
Okay. Um, I'm not sure without looking at it specifically about
Yeah.
what I would have how I would have fixed that.
I do know that we've had trouble if a if a bank isn't actually in the course that you're in, you can access it still if it's been bookmarked or anything. So, or you can access your other courses. Sometimes that's caused, like Freeman, you had an issue with that when with you guys had like a group sandbox that had questions in it that everyone had access to, so you didn't have to pull the banks over, but some of the banks you pulled from were in your personal course, and because it wasn't shared, that's why it caused some trouble. So those kind of things, though, we can diagnose that, like Freeman said, because it is case by case. I don't want it to sound like it goes wrong all the time, because it really works beautifully most of the time. So if for some reason you pull stuff over and it's not working, just share with us a link to your course and what the problem is, and we can kind of look in there and try and figure out what's going on. So, or your OADC can look in there. So,
Cool.
Yeah, I really should not have projected all of my my uneasiness about banks onto this because like they do work wonderfully, and I just have my way of doing things just because it's the way I've been doing them. But
yeah, I almost exclusively use banks to make my quizzes. So, and I don't have issues with it. There was a question in the chat about if you have a large bank that is like over a whole unit, can you just pick a few questions and put them into a group from a bank? Can you show them how to do that instead?
yeah. So in quizzes to just add the specific questions instead of the whole bank, right?
Yeah, but adding it to a group instead of just throwing them separately into the,
Okay.
you know what I mean, what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
No, you have to
No.
go still through find a question.
You don't create the group first?
I don't think you have to.
Okay. Well, I don't know. How would you do this then? Because I would create the group and then just pull the questions and move them. But
Oh, you can do it that way too.
what would you do? Walk me through it. Find a question.
Well, if you click on find a question, can't you add it to a group from there or no? I think you can. Like click on any question.
Oh, yep,
Yeah,
you
right
can.
there.
So,
So that's how I do it.
okay. Yeah, that works too.
So you would just, on the bank, you would just click them and then do that add to a new group, or you can do what Freeman's doing and um, make the group first, then choose your questions, go to the bottom and click that group that you made.
Hmm.
Isn't showing up for some reason.
Did I not make my group? Not sure. Is there a reason that's not showing up, or
I don't know.
that should work.
Maybe just do make a new group for right now.
Oh, new group. How many did I pick?
So when you
Two?
do this, you would pick the number of questions that you want, how many points per question, and then you hit create group. One thing about question banks and grouping like this is that they all have to be worth the same amount of points. Even if you choose in the question, let's say you designated a question as being like 10 points when you made it, it doesn't really matter. It's going to go based on that bar at the top that says how many points per question. So everything in your group has to be worth the same amount of points. So if you're going to have questions that you want to be worth more points, you would want to make a separate group for them. So notice how in the group, they're all listed out separately. The students will get those in a scrambled random order. So this is another way to like scramble or shuffle a test without necessarily having to use banks. You could just use groups as well. But banks are nice because it saves them forever. So that was Mary's question. Did that help you, Mary?
That helped a lot, thank you. I tend to have a lot of groups within my quizzes, but then I manually put the questions in there. So this will just save me a step and I can drop them right into the group. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So if you create your test the way you did sample 2, you still need to copy the question banks?
No, it's put them into the quiz directly, so.
So you don't need to copy that over when you transfer it?
Correct. Because it's not pulling from the bank, you've actually like put them into the quiz.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, once you pull them out like this, they're no longer associated with that bank necessarily. So.
Do we have any other questions?
There was a question, I don't know if I said this already, about ExamView. I put a link to a tutorial in there if anybody needs that. It's pretty straightforward to follow. It has pictures. But if you need help, if you're trying to move ExamView stuff and make banks out of that, then you can reach out to one of us to help you. But what'll happen is when you import the ExamView quiz, it'll basically, I think it throws it into into your unfiled banks. So when I do this, I usually rename my unfiled banks into something else, so that the only thing in there is the ExamView test that I just imported, and then I'll rename the unfiled bank to like unit 3, whatever, and then I can organize it after that. So I would just do one at a time. But I don't remember who asked that question. Lily. So Lily, if you have questions as you need to do that though, please just reach out to one of us and ask. So Eileen's asked if multiple groups are in a quiz, do the groups appear in the order listed or do the groups randomize as well? The groups do not randomize, only the questions within the group. So they will show up in whatever order. So you can move groups around. Freeman, do you want to show how you can like drag?
Can-
So those little like, it
yeah.
looks like a track pad on the side or whatever, or grip tape or something. You can grab that and slide a bank around. I just threw into the chat the link for the PD credit if you need that. We will be hosting one of these every day this week at 9 o'clock. So we're doing different topics each day. And then at 1 o'clock today, we're doing a special one on some new Canvas features that were just released. So. If you want to join us every day, love to have you. And then I think Julie is also doing one today. I'm trying to remember.
It's at 10 o'clock again.
Oh no, she starts hers tomorrow. So I'll put this link in there too. This is the virtual calendar. So this has all the EdTech and the OIDC trainings for the week. So this is unique. This link is unique to this week. So you can check that out and come to any of the ones that are going to be helpful to you.
Thank you.
And if there's any other questions, we can still ask those or answer those too.
All right, we good?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody.